Before I begin, just a content warning that there will be mention of SA, grooming, and predatory behavior in this video. The Last of Us has given us so many gut-wrenching moments throughout the season, and while there was a lot of beauty in these sad moments of the show, there's definitely one episode where there was none of that, and it was just a purely horrifying experience. And that was episode 8, where we meet David. I think this episode was written really well, but I think that's a given already, and a lot of people already have videos on that, so I'm not gonna harp on the writing so much. But what I wanted to talk about was this specific line when he says,
I've decided you do need a father, so I'm gonna keep you, and I'm gonna teach you.
because one aspect of David's character that's probably the most disturbing thing about him was that he was a teacher before the apocalypse. Before this episode, we see the progression between Ellie and Joel and how their relationship is slowly forming into a surrogate father-daughter relationship. Joel is a harbor of safety for Ellie, and I don't know about you, but the thing that sort of lingered at the back of my mind when I was watching the series up to that point, and especially when Joel and Ellie had the interaction about how people are probably more of a danger to them than the cordyceps, is that it really was a gamble for Ellie to be safe under the care of Joel, that things could so easily turn out for the worse for her if Joel wasn't Joel. Because for all intents and purposes, Joel is already labeled a dangerous man by everyone they meet, and could have harmed her, but he's keeping Ellie by his side and teaching her how to survive, and inadvertently becomes a father figure to her. He is a threat, but not the type of threat that is most terrifying for a young, vulnerable girl. Enter David. The first introduction to his violence is during his interaction with his congregation. We see him slap a young girl close to Ellie's age publicly for speaking out of turn, and he says this.
But the truth is, Hannah, you will always have a father, and you will show him respect when he's speaking.
He refers to himself as a surrogate father and commands her obedience, and in turn the entire congregation's obedience, because he's doing this power play thing where he's doing something violent and no one can stand up to him. And while Joel exercises his power to protect, David exercises his power to keep everyone under control. And while Joel teaches Ellie how to shoot so she can survive for herself, David preaches to his congregation so they depend on him for their survival. And this scene is actually foreshadowing what's going to happen to Ellie at the end of the episode, because what this scene is showing is David's abuser playbook. We see a young girl acting in a way he does not expect her to or want her to, and she is exercising her own agency by wanting the killers of her father to be killed and interrupting David's planned speech in the process. He responds by an act of violence and then proceeds with a veiled threat about her needing a father to assert his authority and power over her. So when Ellie does not fall for his classic grooming tactics, he responds with an act of violence and then proceeds with a veiled threat about her needing a father to assert himself again.
I've decided you do need a father, so I'm gonna keep you, and I'm gonna teach you.
Now, I'm sure we all know what this means, and because I'm not monetized anyway and the chances of this being age restricted won't matter, I can spell it out for you. He is a child predator, and what he says is part of his abusive, fucked up vernacular, which makes the whole thing even more horrific because he does not outrightly say the things he intends to do. Instead, he uses words that are comforting like love, when he means rape. He uses this same kind of language when speaking about cordyceps. What do cordyceps do again? Oh yeah, devour people and turn them into zombies. They traumatize people to the point where they lose themselves. Sounds familiar? And that is his truth, his belief system, his so-called conversion. He laces the destruction of humanity by cordyceps as an act of love. And that is the same way he talks about sexually assaulting someone. And that is what makes it scarier. It's a lot more frightening for someone to say they're being kind to you while hurting you in the process, rather than someone who outrightly says they're going to hurt you. Like with Joel, he clearly threatens someone with what he's literally going to do rather than disguising it under some sort of soft language. It makes you wonder how much of this tactic was used in David's life as a teacher. In this day alone, we see his predatory playbook play out twice, which makes you wonder how many times has this happened. If the young girl from before was harmed the same way he intended to harm Ellie, and how many girls were there before this? It has been 20 years since the apocalypse, and before those 20 years was his life as a teacher, where his job was to interact with many children, and how many of them were hurt. How often did he single out students who acted out or were isolated with placating words and exploiting their situation? It's a lot more fucked up when a person is associating something violent with something positive, because then you're wondering what kind of mental gymnastics is this person doing and what are they really capable of. And with that, let me bring your attention to this line. He says he struggled with his violent heart but was shown the truth after the world ended. And how I perceived this was, this struggle he's talking about is not really about him being remorseful for having disturbing ideas and not acting on them, but rather he was struggling to confine to a system that could and would punish him for his violence, and that system no longer existed. The apocalypse gave him his own system to abuse as he sees fit. It's like the Henry Ford quote, "Money doesn't change man, it merely unmasks them." If a man is naturally selfish or arrogant or greedy, the money brings that out. That's all. And we can apply this sentiment onto the disease and following apocalypse. Joel was an ordinary guy trying to provide and protect his daughter, and even after the violence he has committed throughout his new existence in the apocalypse, he is still a father trying to protect a daughter, because that is what he is at his core. David, on the other hand, was a teacher before the apocalypse and probably was doing so to get in close proximities of young girls he could prey on. And during the apocalypse, he still is that same person, only with a different title, but he is in this position to be in close proximities to young people who are dependent on him, and he is able to exploit that even more. He adopts positions that are often associated with parental responsibilities. Teachers and preachers can be deemed as the fathers of their communities because they offer guidance and care to people younger or less experienced. And he continually uses this type of language,
Feeds and protects its children.
referring to humans infected by cordyceps as their children, and he himself is a disease that inflicts itself onto his children. When he says that he found God after the world ended and how it can be the best and worst time for it, he's not wrong. It was the best time for him to do so because he has a network of people to abuse and control. But if you were one of his followers, then it's probably the worst time to find God because you would end up being abused by him. He uses religion to exercise his power, to manipulate people and gain gratification for himself, just like how he probably used his power as a teacher to get close to students because he is a predator. He says that he's this shepherd among sheep. Sheep referring to people who are weaker and therefore more malleable and easier to prey on. Him saying that he was shown the truth when the world ended actually means that the possibilities and extremity of what he could do and get away with was revealed to him, because the cordyceps gave him a space he won't be so easily persecuted, and only made his access to the vulnerable even easier because people are desperately trying to survive. He was given the means to exercise his predation that was already lurking underneath the surface. The apocalypse just brought that out. That's all. Which forces you to think about how many people do you know have that lurking underneath them? How many teachers? And that is the most disturbing thing about David.